You are a stonecutter in the temple of Deir el-Bahari. It has been years since the queen died, years since anyone in this place dared say her name out loud. This morning, a priest hands you a chisel and gives you a single order. Erase her. Not just her name, her face. Every cartouche, every relief where she stands tall as a king, wearing the false beard and the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, carved by your own father's hands, or maybe yours. You have heard the whispers for weeks now, that the new Pharaoh wants no trace of a woman who ruled like a man left standing in stone, that her memory has become dangerous, that the priests themselves have decided the gods never truly sanctioned what she did. You walk the length of the temple, chisel in hand, past columns that have not changed since the day they were raised. The gardens that once lined these terraces are gone now. The incense trees long dead, but the walls remember everything. 20 years of a rain carved into every surface around you, and then you find her. A woman standing exactly where you are standing now, watching this temple rise from nothing. Her expedition to a distant land, recorded in careful detail along the stone beside you. Ships, incense, gold, animals no one in this valley had ever seen before her ships brought them home. You raise the chisel to her face. For a moment, you do not move. Every mason before you who received an order like this simply obeyed. No questions, no hesitation. That is how it has always worked in this kingdom. A pharaoh commands, and the stone answers whatever the command happens to be. Somewhere behind you, another worker has already started on the great obelisks she raised at Karnak. Instead of breaking them apart, he is quietly sealing them behind a wall of fresh masonry. Slower, quieter, almost like he cannot bring himself to destroy something that size completely, so he chooses to hide it instead. You look back at the face in front of you one last time, then you raise the chisel and you strike. What happens to this wall and to that hidden obelisk over the next 3,000 years is something almost nobody alive today could have predicted.
Before we get into who she really was, if stories like this are the ones you want more of, hit subscribe. Now here is what actually happened to the woman that stonecutter was ordered to erase. Her name was Hatshepsut, and for over 20 years, she ruled Egypt more successfully than almost anyone who came before her. She was born the daughter of Thutmose I, and later married her own half-brother, Thutmose II, as was custom among Egyptian royalty at the time. According to an inscription at Karnak, her father had already named her as his intended successor before his death, declaring to the assembled nobles that she alone would direct the people in every sphere of the palace, and that they should obey her word and unite themselves at her command. Whether that inscription reflects what truly happened or was written later to justify what came next, historians still debate. When Thutmose II died, the throne technically belonged to his son by another wife, a boy barely 2 years old, named Thutmose III. Hatshepsut stepped in as regent, ruling on his behalf exactly as royal women had done before her. That should have been the end of the story. A temporary arrangement until the boy grew old enough to rule alone. It was not. Within a few years, Hatshepsut did something almost no woman in Egyptian history had done before. She claimed the full title of pharaoh, not queen, not regent, king of Upper and Lower Egypt, the same title carried by her father and every male ruler before him. She took a new throne name, Mat-Kare, meaning the soul of the sun, God is truth, a name designed to reassure her people that order and legitimacy still rule the throne, no matter how unusual the person sitting on it. And she did not just claim the title quietly. She had herself depicted in official temple carvings, wearing the traditional false beard of kingship, the shendit kilt, even the muscular build reserved for male pharaohs. In the formal language of Egyptian religious art, a king had to look like a king, so that is exactly how she chose to be shown. Here is what almost nobody outside of Egyptology realizes. This was not vanity, it was strategy. In a system built entirely around the idea that only a man could hold the throne, Hatshepsut did not try to change the rules. She simply made herself fit them, on stone, forever. She also made sure the gods themselves seemed to agree with her. The oracle of Amun, the most powerful religious authority in Egypt, declared that it was the god's own will that Hatshepsut become pharaoh. In return, her monuments are covered in offerings and inscriptions, dedicated to Amun, again and again, as if she never stopped reminding everyone exactly whose blessing she carried. None of this would have been possible without the people around her. Hatshepsut was supported by a network of powerful officials, viziers, generals, and priests, many of whom had already served her father and her husband. But one name stands above the rest: Senenmut. Born to literate but non-royal parents, Senenmut rose from relative obscurity into one of the most powerful positions in Egypt, eventually overseeing nearly every major building project of Hatshepsut's reign. He tutored her daughter, Neferur. He appears in temple reliefs, adoring the queen directly, an extraordinary privilege for someone without royal blood. For centuries, historians have speculated about exactly how close that relationship really was. What we know for certain is that Hatshepsut trusted him with the two projects that would define how history remembers her. The first were the obelisks at Karnak. Picture this: 2 single blocks of solid granite, each nearly 100 feet tall, weighing over 400 tons apiece, quarried, carved, and somehow transported down the Nile on a fleet of 27 ships, towed by 850 oarsmen. This was not a minor construction project. This was one of the most ambitious engineering feats attempted anywhere in the ancient world, and Hatshepsut commissioned it specifically to prove, through sheer physical impossibility made real, that her reign carried the full weight of pharaonic power. One of those obelisks still stands at Karnak today, nearly 3,500 years later, the tallest surviving obelisk in Egypt. The second and even more remarkable project was her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. Djeser, meaning sublime of the sublimes, built directly into the cliffs on the west bank of the Nile. Terraced colonnades, once lined with living gardens and incense trees, rising in perfect symmetry against the rock face behind them. Even now, stripped of its original color and greenery, it remains one of the most architecturally striking structures to survive from the ancient world. It was on the walls of this same temple that Hatshepsut recorded her most audacious claim of all. According to the inscriptions, the god Amun spoke through an oracle, commanding that a path be found to a distant land called Punt, likely somewhere along the coast of modern-day Somalia or Eritrea, to bring back myrrh and incense for his temple. Hatshepsut's response, carved permanently into stone, was that she would lead the expedition herself, by sea and by land, to bring back marvels for the god who had placed her on the throne. The ships returned loaded with incense trees, ebony, gold, ivory, and exotic animals, all meticulously carved into relief after relief along the temple walls. For Egypt, this was not simply a trade mission. It was living proof, displayed for every visitor to see, that the gods approved of a woman ruling as king. 20 years of this, stable governance, massive construction, expanding trade networks. By almost every measure historians used to judge a pharaoh's reign, Hatshepsut succeeded. And then, sometime after her death, someone gave the order that Stonecutter carried out. Remember that chisel from the opening. You are about to find out exactly whose reputation was on the other end of it, and why the real answer is far more complicated than most documentaries make it sound. For a long time, historians assumed the culprit was obvious. Thutmose III, the boy pushed aside for 2 decades while his stepmother ruled in his place, finally old enough and powerful enough to erase the woman who had denied him his throne. Simple revenge, carved out one wall at a time. Except the evidence does not fully support that story. Here is the detail that changes everything. Not every image of Hatshepsut was destroyed. Carvings showing her as queen, as regent, as the mother figure standing beside a young Thutmose III were largely left untouched. The attacks were aimed almost exclusively at images showing her as king, as pharaoh, as the woman who had claimed a title that, in the eyes of Egyptian religious order, was never supposed to belong to her. That distinction matters enormously. This was not an attempt to erase Hatshepsut the person. It was an attempt to erase the precedent she had set, the idea that a woman could sit on the throne of Egypt with the full authority of a king. And here is something even stranger. Recent archaeological research has raised real doubts about whether Thutmose III was even the one who gave the final order at all. Some scholars now point instead to his son, Amenhotep II, who may have carried out the erasure decades later, possibly to secure his own uncontested claim to the throne by removing any trace of a precedent where royal succession had once bent to make room for someone entirely outside the expected male line. We may never know for certain which king gave that order, or whether it came from personal resentment, political necessity, or religious tradition demanding a correction to what many Egyptians saw as an unnatural break in Ma'at, the fundamental balance of order in the universe. What we do know is what the workers actually did once that order reached them. At Karnak, one of Hatshepsut's towering obelisks was never smashed at all. Instead, it was quietly enclosed inside a new sandstone wall built as part of Thutmose III's own temple additions, hidden from view rather than destroyed. Picture standing at the base of that wall centuries later, completely unaware that one of the tallest monuments of Hatshepsut's reign was sealed just inches behind the stone in front of you, preserved almost perfectly, protected by the very structure that was meant to bury it from memory. That decision, made by workers whose names we will never know, is a large part of why we can still reconstruct so much of Hatshepsut's reign today. For centuries afterward, her name faded from official Egyptian king lists entirely. Later generations largely forgot a woman had ever ruled as pharaoh at all. It was not until the 19th century that Egyptologists began piecing her story back together, starting with Edouard C. Neville's excavations at Deir el-Bahari between 1893 and 1906, followed decades later by the Metropolitan Museum of Art's expeditions under Herbert Winlock, which uncovered statue after shattered statue of her, deliberately broken but never entirely lost. Since the 1960s, Polish archaeological teams have spent decades painstakingly restoring her temple. Stone by stone, matching fragments scattered across storerooms and rubble piles back into the reliefs they were chiseled from in the first place. But even with the temple slowly coming back together, one enormous question remained unanswered for over a century. Where was her body? Hatshepsut's tomb, when archaeologists finally located it, was empty. No mummy, no definitive trace of the woman herself, only the monuments she had built. For decades, that absence became almost as famous as the erasure itself. One more piece of Hatshepsut, seemingly gone for good. In 2007, Egyptian archaeologist Zahi Hawass decided to take a second look at two unidentified female mummies sitting largely unexamined in a small tomb known as KV60, first discovered back in 1903. One of them, an obese woman who had died around the age of 50, showed signs of diabetes and what appeared to be bone cancer. Hawass ordered a CT scan of a small wooden box, one that had been sitting in storage for over a century, bearing Hatshepsut's own royal seal. Embalmers in ancient Egypt often stored a pharaoh's internal organs separately from the body itself, and this box was believed to hold exactly that. Inside, alongside a preserved liver, the scan revealed something nobody expected: a single tooth, a molar, missing one root. When dentists compared it to the mummy from KV60, they found a gap in her upper jaw, the exact size and shape needed to hold that missing molar, still lacking the same root that was absent from the tooth in the box. Hawass announced it to the world as definitive proof. This was Hatshepsut, found at last, in a tomb hardly anyone had taken seriously for 100 years. Not every Egyptologist has been willing to call it settled. Some have raised questions about the tooth itself, and DNA testing on royal mummies from this period has never been entirely conclusive. The identification is now the leading theory, treated as fact by most of the field, but it remains technically a very well-supported best guess rather than absolute certainty. Still, if the identification holds, it means the woman an entire dynasty tried to erase from stone was lying, largely unnoticed, only a few hundred meters from the temple built to keep her memory alive, waiting a century longer than anyone expected to be recognized again. And that is the final irony worth sitting with. The attempt to remove Hatshepsut from history did not succeed. If anything, the fragments left behind, the walled obelisks still standing in the dark, the selectively damaged reliefs, the careful distinction between queen and king in what was destroyed, gave later historians a roadmap. Not just a record of who she was, but of exactly how threatening her legacy still felt to the men who came after her. They tried to erase a pharaoh who, according to the rules of their world, should never have existed at all. Instead, they left behind one of the clearest examples in ancient history of just how far a system will go to protect itself from an exception it never planned for, and just how much can survive even when someone spends a lifetime trying to make sure it does not. Think about what that actually means. An entire kingdom built on the idea that a single break from tradition had to be corrected no matter how long ago it happened, no matter how successful that reign had actually been. 20 years of prosperity, massive temples, expanded trade. None of it mattered once the precedent itself became the problem. That is the part of this story that still feels uncomfortably familiar. Even now, a system does not always attack the person who broke its rules. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it waits decades until the person is safely gone. And then it goes after the evidence instead, hoping that if enough of it disappears, the exception itself will simply stop being remembered as something that ever happened at all. It almost worked.